Hey everyone. We were greatly saddened to learn of the passing of Tameika Meadows, a great BCBA, author of the I Love ABA blog, and advocate for the power of behavior analysis. Tameika was also one of our earliest supporters, and it was a real treat when we finally had her join as our guest. In honor of her contributions to the field, we're rebroadcasting that episode and donating all CE fees raised for it from now until June 2023 to Black Applied Behavior Analysts. Tameika was scheduled to talk at the BABA conference as one of their invited speakers. While the donation is a poor substitute for her presence, we know what is raised will go to promoting behavior analysts in the Black community as a part of the legacy she leaves behind. Thank you. Hey everybody, welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me as always are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey Rob, it's Diana.
And it's me, Jackie.
Oh boy, you guys, I don't know about you, but we've been doing this podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research for over 5 years now. And while
I have been doing it.
You have been?
Yeah.
We have. That's why I said we have been.
You said, I don't know about you.
Oh, okay. I do know about you. I know you've been here the whole time. I think a lot of people probably assume that our favorite interest is podcast or talk about behavior analysis. And while those are great interests, I don't know if they would be our most preferred interests or our uniquest of all interests. And speaking of unique interests, we probably could do a whole episode about unique interests in how we use unique interests in our practice. And to do so, we are very fortunate to have a special guest who is joining us to talk about this topic. Why don't we not waste any time and introduce that special guest? Over 5 years, I think she's one of the first people to email us to say thank you for making the show and good job on the show. So we're very excited to get her on herself. And that's Tameika Meadows from the I Love ABA blog. Tameika, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight.
Of course. I am super, super excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
We are very happy as well. And since unique interest was a topic that you are also uniquely interested in, or maybe not uniquely, because all four of us are talking about it on an episode, why don't we spend a little time saying what our own unique interests are? Maybe you could start by telling us all about yourself for our listeners who maybe haven't been to your blog, and then maybe some of your favorite interests.
So I am a BCBA living in Atlanta. I entered the field when I was in college. I was a psychology major who at the time knew nothing about ABA. And I started working with one family. And then over time, started seeing more and more families in my area and kind of started to realize that, hey, I think I might want to do this like permanently as a career. And at that point, decided to get certified and kind of started on that whole journey. Since I've been a clinician, I've done a little bit of everything. I've done school-based, I've done clinic-based, I've done home-based. At the moment, I'm primarily doing a lot of consulting, kind of professional development, CE creation kind of work. I mostly work with school-aged clients, I'd say 12 and younger. And kind of my passions clinically would be new hire training, working with brand new clinicians. I also really, really love family support, caregiver training. And let's see, so special interests, they change because I think for most people, they would say that what they're super, super into is subject to vary. So at the moment, a lot of Marvel. I love WandaVision. Mm-hmm. I love streaming a variety of shows on Netflix or Hulu. I love relaxation days, which is what I call my off days where I have nothing to do. And I take it very seriously and I do nothing. So they vary a lot. And if you asked me a month from now, or if you had asked me a month ago, I probably would have had different answers.
It's the way it is with interests, isn't it? You like change. It for a while and then they change, yeah?
I think that's kind of the case for most of us.
Jackie and Diana, what would you consider your unique interests?
Okay, I'll go. I think we all share a unique interest in that we are interested in behavior analysis, which is a pretty niche thing, first of all.
Very true.
But in addition to that, I think I have some unique interests, and one of them is semi-precious rocks and stones. So some of my favorite stones are unikite, obsidian jasper, and fire agate.
Mm-hmm.
And I also really like abstract expressionism, such as Rothko or Kandinsky. Those are some. Paul Klee.
Got really hoity-toity over on this side of the
I'm
microphone.
sorry. Well, no one ever lets me
serious.
talk about these things. But yeah, I really like those things, and I don't really have anyone to share those interests with. No offense.
I feel like I'm very supportive about the I'm always like, oh, kids, ask your mom about rocks. There's some rocks over there.
I don't get any takers. What about you, Jackie?
Well, this is a relatively new, unique interest for me because during COVID, I've been spending many, many hours outside with my young child because she's been at home hanging with me the whole time. I am now really excited about identifying bird calls and different birds that I see in the woods, which is fun.
Yeah.
And I also, along that same vein, have now been really excited when I can identify the trees that I walk by, what they look like and their leaves.
I find plants confusing. Their names are confusing.
They are
They all look the
confusing.
same to me. There's too much.
It's hard because if you think about like how many different types of maple trees there are out there, the difference is like a pointy leaf top versus a rounded leaf top. So you really have to study your leaves.
Especially in winter. It's really hard.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
We have like a fun botanical garden near us, and I love walking through it. And I'm like, I wish I could name all these plants or be someone who's like, oh, look, it's a plant. I don't even
It's a
know.
plant,
I
guys.
can't even
Look at
find
this
one
plant.
name of a plant. It just seems like such a good skill.
That's cool, Jackie. I didn't know that about you.
Yeah, it's new. It's part of this homeschool curriculum that I've been doing, and I actually really enjoy. I'm like, oh my gosh, look at that! It's a black-capped chickadee in danger because of the number of D's that he says at the end.
Whoa.
All right, now we need to ask
Impressive.
Rob.
Yes.
No, you don't need to ask me. I don't
Rob,
We all know
what
special
am I-
and unique
What
interests.
are my special and unique interests? I mean, I think I'm with Tameika and Marvel. Marvel's a big interest, and I liked Marvel back when saying I am a big Marvel fan. When you get a lot of like quizzical looks like that, what are you talking about? That's not anything anyone cares about. As opposed to now when it's the biggest franchises of all
Yeah.
time. Kind
Super
of.
huge. Yeah.
Rob's a
Uh,
true believer.
I'm a true believer. That's right. Hey, I met Stan Lee. I met Stan Lee once
I
before
know.
he passed.
I know. I know, honey.
And then, Star Wars has been a big interest of mine for a long time. And if all has gone well by the time you're hearing this, I think I will have finished all of the Star Wars books published since 2014, since Disney purchased Star Wars. Like I finished them all. That was my quarantine activity. I just
Wow.
plowed through Star Wars books.
Impressive. It's impressive.
Thank you. If you want to know about any minor characters who were standing in the background holding a coffee during Empire Strikes Back, I read a story about them at one point. So I got all that information.
Rob's other special and unique interest / talent is being able to identify almost any voice actor that comes on the television.
I am good at that too.
Yeah.
Local history.
I hear a lot
I like
about
local
that.
history
I
too.
hear probably more about that than I do about Marvel. So
That's true.
I just thought to bring that up.
It became too mainstream. I'm niche. I don't want to another too popular for me. So
All right.
I think one of the fun things about unique interests that we've probably all developed as professionals in the field is that you can take your unique interest and find a way to tie it into your job or tie it into a hobby or bring it a little bit farther than just being a hobby, because a hobby people are like, oh, you spend so much time on it. But if you tie it into your professional work, oh, everyone's very excited. You're like, wow, that's so cool that you added that in, or that you can bring that, your writing interest or your metaphor from your unique interest into a discussion of, behavior analysis, let's say, which is all of our profession. But what we're going to be talking about tonight is not how to do that, which kind of would be its own fun workshop, but how can we use the unique interests of our clients? Because I'm sure all of us, when thinking about unique interests and thinking about various clients we've worked with or families we've worked with, probably spent more time saying these unique interests are getting in the way of the important, capital I, bold, important stuff. We shouldn't bother with them. And taking a moment to say, you know what? Perhaps that wasn't the best tack to take. So we're going to be reading some articles, well, not reading them, but discussing the articles on,
We did read them.
We read them. We'll talk about them on how can we use unique interests in developing treatment plans in a variety of ways.
Yeah, and I think that's why we also wanted to think of this as incorporating unique or special interests too. So we're not thinking of it as like a exchange, right? Like, oh, you do this and then we'll talk about your unique or special interest. Like, let's find other ways that we can incorporate it and thread it throughout our sessions such that the entire session feels a lot more reinforcing and supportive of our client's unique interests.
It's meaningful. Yeah, we're not just talking about first this, then that, but a meaningful
Yeah, not
utilization.
transactional. That's what I couldn't think of.
Ooh, that sounds so...
Yeah, that is a good word.
That sounds gross now, though. It's like, what's a transactional use of unique interest?
Right,
Ugh.
exactly. So that's why we're going to incorporate them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whereas I wanted to
And
call
that's
it
why I wanted to have-
utilizing unique interests for the alliteration.
Oh, I'm not one to pass up an alliteration opportunity. I completely understand. But that's why I wanted to have Tameika on, because if anyone out there hasn't found Tameika's blog, Tameika, you make such great points. And basically every post that you make, I'm like, yes, I love what you're saying. And you bring up all of these, discussions that we're about to have about the importance of client rights and, allowing our sessions to be guided by our clients. And I love the way that you thread in your personal stories into that. And I'm always just like right there with you 100%. So when I was thinking about this topic, I immediately thought of you because I already knew based on what you had written that you and I were on the same page.
Yes, definitely. We are on the same wavelength when it comes to this. That's for sure. Yes.
So thank you for everything that you post out there. I think that it's important.
I mean, it's kind of my own special interest, like peeking out in a way, because I'm like, if I'm going to talk about something, like I'm going to make it relevant to myself, which is probably not the best way to write to a large group of people, but that's honestly what I do. I'm like, if I'm going to talk about this, I'm going to talk about it this way, because this is the way I'm interested in it. And then very weirdly, other people were also like, yeah, I'm interested in that way too. And that's kind of how that happened.
Well, I don't think that's weird at all, because I think that's being authentic. Honestly, that's like the core, I think, of what we're doing right here in this topic, right?
That's very true.
We want to be authentic with our clients and honestly sit down with them and say, I want to learn about what this thing is that's cool to you. And that's so different than saying, yeah. In a minute, you can tell me about that thing that's cool.
Right.
To you. Right. So it just changes the whole dynamic of the relationship. You have to have that in order to have the trust and support that's really needed in order to create a conducive environment for learning. So
absolutely.
I think that you're right on track. And I think that's why people are drawn to your blog, because you are very authentic.
I very much appreciate that.
All right.
I'm fangirling a little bit. I'm going to reel it back in.
Oh my God. No,
Rob's going to tell us the articles.
That would be moi. That would not be you. Okay.
All right. So we have a number of articles to discuss tonight, and we might not be able to go into as much of a depth for all of them, which is fine because not all of them, I think, went into as much depth of ways that you could use unique interests. They sort of, various amounts of depth, I suppose. But we're going to start with a classic. Surprise, we haven't done it before, but it is a perfect one to start us off, which is balancing the right to habilitation with the right to personal liberties, the rights of people with developmental disabilities to eat too many donuts and take a nap, by Bannerman, Sheldon, Sherman, and Harchick from the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, 1990. We'll also be discussing effects of circumscribed interests on the social behaviors of children with autism spectrum disorders by Boyd, Conroy, Mansell, Nakao, and Alter from the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders, 2007. Using perseverative interests to elicit joint attention behaviors in young children with autism, theoretical and clinical implications for understanding motivation by Vismara and Lyons from the Journal of Positive Behavior Interventions, 2007. Incorporating the thematic ritualistic behaviors of children with autism into games, increasing social play interactions with siblings by Baker, also from the Journal of Positive Behavior Interventions from the year 2000. And finally, using the special interests of autistic children to facilitate meaningful engagement and learning by Davey from Good Autism Practice 2020. So, Tameika, we would just really love it if you would start us off by talking about the Bannerman article. It's kind of, it's a classic. I think we all probably read it in grad school or for fun at some point, but it is one of those oldies but goodies that comes up all the time. If you're reading anything about human rights, you're reading anything about adults with disabilities, Bannerman's going to be in the citations at the end. What is relevant about Bannerman? Why does it keep coming back to us these days? Why is it's such an evergreen article?
This is a favorite for me. I feel like it's one of those that just never loses its relevance. It's a conversation that we keep returning to, and I feel like it's a conversation we need to keep returning to. But it's definitely one of my faves. I love to talk about it.
What is it for folks either who haven't read it in a while or who possibly haven't read it yet? And we're making a face at you like, haven't read it yet right now. I think we're all doing that. I assume we all over our microphones. You never know.
Not everyone has read it.
Well, I'm making a face anyway, because it's my right to make a face. Whenever it's my right to make a face and eat too many donuts.
I like that. It's my right to make a face. Cute.
I'm eating too many donuts while doing so. So would you mind kind of, Tameika, doing a quick kind of summary of the key points of Bannerman and colleagues' article?
The primary focus of the article for anyone who either hasn't read it in a long time, because I know for a lot of us, it was required at some point in grad school. So maybe you haven't read it for a long time, or maybe you're not familiar, but kind of the key point is the right to choose, which simultaneously is going to mean the right to refuse, because anytime you're choosing something, you're refusing something else. So the right to choose in the context of being a service provider with a great deal of control over the clients that we serve, because we do serve populations who don't make many choices in their day-to-day life. Choices are made for them. And so it's kind of this deep dive into the balance of habilitation. And that's a word you're going to see over and over when you read this article. I would suggest you replace that word with intervention, just because it might help you frame this a little bit better if you think about that word as intervention, because it's the same idea. Like, we're going in and we're trying to help an individual overcome barriers. So the balance of habilitation and the right to personal liberty. So the conclusion that they reach by the end of the article is that it's not like yin and yang, like they're not opposites. It's not one or the other. Like, the goal is that you are providing intervention to consumers who need said intervention, but you are also respecting the rights and wishes and desires of that individual. So they open up with some good background information around legislation, like the 1975 Education for All Handicapped Children Act. And they kind of talk about how this legislation happened because of the fact that there was a history of inadequate services for people with disabilities. And so we had to kind of put mandates in place to say, hey, this individual has the right to live and they have the right to go to school. And so, we kind of push that through, and then funding sources. We're starting to make funding contingent on meeting certain standards with the clients that you serve. And, and that's great. And that's a really good thing. But kind of a side effect, an unwanted side effect of that was that there's all these people making decisions about this individual with disabilities, and no one's really asking that individual with disabilities what they want. And they spend a lot of time in the article giving like very specific examples of that. So there's a quote from Skinner that I really like in the article that says, choice is anything but free. And I mean, I feel like that's like a whole 3-4 hour conversation, but
Yeah.
because there's so much there. Like, choice is not free, but if you think about it, it's so true, because most of us have what we imagine to be choice in our life, but we want that imagined choice. Like we want the illusion of choice in our day-to-day life. We want to believe I'm making choices and decisions that impact my own life, and they're not being made for me, even though the reality is probably much closer to an illusion of freedom and choice, which basically means you can choose what you choose, but you cannot choose the impact of what you chose. You can't choose what happens after you choose what you chose. They also talk about kind of the present status, which, keep in mind, this is 1990. So when I say present status, it was quite a while ago. But listen to this. This is really interesting. So the present status is that clients had little to no input in treatment goals or procedures used. Behaviors were being taught with no regard for client preference. Choice making was not being taught. There were not enough opportunities for clients to make choices. That doesn't sound so retro, does it? That still happens in facilities and schools. And that's not. So to me, reading it, it's like, wow, that's super relevant to right now. And this was written in 1990. That's crazy. And it's in the best interest of the client to be allowed to skip an intervention session, to say, I don't want to work today, or I don't want to do puzzles today, or I don't want to make my bed. I don't, or like it says in the title, to eat too many donuts and take a nap.
Mm-hmm.
They also go on to talk about the effects of choice. So there's like a really long section of the article where they're talking about other research in their article. So for example, most people will choose a situation in which a choice is available over a situation in which it's not.
Mhm.
And most people will participate more when there are choices available than when they are not.
Mhm.
Also, problem behaviors are exhibited less frequently when an individual has opportunities for choice. And I mean, I feel like for most of us as BCBAs, we know that to be true, but you may or may not have known that the research actually backs that up and says, yeah, that's true. They do point out some kind of research cautions, which I also really like towards the end of the article. Like they talk about the issues that need to be considered. For example, a lot of the studies that they cite use within subject analyses. So it makes it hard to kind of pinpoint the responses of individual subjects and the effects of variables over time. They also talk about that a lot of these studies were conducted in research settings. So it's a little less known. Okay, well, what would that look like at home? What would that look like in the classroom? What kind of effects would we get if we applied the same strategy in natural situations? And they talk about in many of the studies, subject perception of whether or not they made choices was rarely assessed, which I think is super important to point out because most of us know when we have choices available, but for a lot of the populations that we serve, they might not pick up on that. So if I don't know that I can choose, I'm not likely to choose. I'm going to wait for someone to tell me this is what you can do right now, or this is what you can eat. So I thought that was a really good point that they raised. And so for the conclusion, they made like, oh my God, so many points that I just loved. But like to highlight a few, service providers should challenge ourselves to work harder at teaching and providing opportunities for choice within the context of habilitation. Again, translate that as intervention. We should emphasize independent living skills and other functional behaviors that are preferred by the client, not us, not developmental norms, the client. Clients should have input on decisions about what they will and will not learn and how they will be taught. And for some of you thinking, well, I can't ask my clients what they want to do today. Like they either would not understand the question or they're not able to speak. It actually gives examples of how you can assess this information for clients who can't speak or don't understand kind of questions like that. You can do preference assessments and analyze how they respond to various stimuli or various programs, starting at various times of the day, like, be a BCBA, like track it. And then, look at the data and see what it's telling you about what this individual wants to do. Another good point they made is teaching a functional yes and no. I love that. As clients can learn to make super complex decisions by just having options listed, kind of the advantages and disadvantages discussed, and then saying, all right, now do you want this or this? I thought that was really cool. They also talk about more training is needed for service providers and teachers so that we're better prepared to encourage and teach choice making. Like basically don't assume that people know how to teach choices because they might not. Like they might need extra help in how to even present that as a target of intervention for their clients. My absolute favorite is client refusal / withdrawal of assent, which is my wording, not the author's wording, but I feel like that's what we would call it now, is when you withdraw your assent during the middle of the session or during intervention. How do I respond to that? And so they give an example of like, if you tell a client, okay, it's time to take a bath, and they're watching TV and they're like, I don't want to take a bath. Like, what's your next step? Do you just like move right into error correction and start like applying all these prompts and I'm going to turn the TV off? Or do you kind of take a step back and say, okay, let's see. Do you have to take a bath right now? Like, is that the most important thing in the world? Like, could you take it in the morning? Could I let you finish this show? Like they basically suggest that you should treat client refusal as like an indicator that I didn't choose that. You chose that. So I don't want to do that. That's what you want me to do. And this is me telling you, I don't want to do that.
Mhm.
I thought that was like super relevant. And just to kind of like summarize like the biggest takeaways, particular care must be applied to highly vulnerable populations like children, research participants, or patients receiving medical care or therapy, because these groups may not be aware of their rights, or they may give up their rights unknowingly in order to obtain treatment. So a lot of us work with kids. We have to be like extra vigilant to make sure that our clients know they have choices, they know what those choices are, and that we won't be mad or upset, or, it won't be a worsening set of conditions for them to make a choice. We have to be super clear about that when we're doing our jobs.
Mhm.
And basically, choice making should be integrated into the habilitation process. And this is not in the article, but I feel like there should just be a mic drop right there. And I don't think people were doing that in 1990. So I will add that for the authors, that when you finish the article, you should just hear in your head like a mic drop, because they presented their point beautifully and then just kind of left you with some lovely conclusion. So you guys should go read it.
If any reprints happen of this article, hopefully they'll add.
Yes, hopefully they'll call me and be open to feedback, because I have some. But I think it's amazing.
Thank you for starting us off with this discussion. I think it's one of those, very multifaceted issues of how do we teach choice? What choices are the most important? What are the rights? And I think the other thing that probably for most professionals out there, I bet almost every single one is saying, you know what? Yes, I do want to put more choice in. And when you're thinking about it, the limiting factor then becomes A, what choices, and B, who is paying me? And they're potentially paying me to kind of, could you like not provide those choices? Because you got to provide XYZ services. And that kind of is its own topic, which we're going to bypass a bit tonight, because what we'd rather do is drill down into, okay, what kinds of choices? And what if we took what I think most of us would traditionally, or at least earlier in our careers, would have seen as potentially, in our own opinions, well, this isn't important behavior, which is more whatever we're going to end up calling it. And that's going to be kind of our next topic, our thematic play, our ritualistic play, stereotypic play, whatever we're going to end up calling it. But those specialized interests that we as practitioners just don't really, we're not interested in them. They're not interesting to us for whatever reason, whether we think they're getting in the way, whether we think they're just, we're not as interested in talking about them because they're not our specific interests we talked about at the top of the show, and how we can use those. Should we be using those in the choice making and treatment developing process? So I think Bannerman still covers, great umbrella of all of that. For anyone who was worried we were going to be talking about policy making or anything like that, nope, we're not going to. We're assuming that you all would love to follow the ethical code in using client preferences as much as possible and getting great outcomes. We're going to take a big assume everyone says, yes, we love Bannerman and we're totally on board. Now what? So we're going to get into the now what with the rest of the episode.
And to be fair, Rob, the new ethical code does talk about gaining client assent whenever possible for the new ethical codes that are coming out in 2022. Yay. So now Tameika's favorite is part of our ethical code that we are required to do.
Which I love. I think that's
me
amazing.
too.
Yeah.
As we all talked about, it is very explicit in the update where we're getting that client assent. It's not sort of that, like, well, wouldn't it be great? It's like, no, it's right there. Do it. You have to. It's ethical. It's best practice. It's what we should be doing. Good point, Jackie. All right. Well, why don't we start before we get into the articles? We're going to need to do a quick operational definitionizing, because every single one of these articles refers to unique interests in a different way. They call it something different, though
They sure do.
I think they're all talking about the same topography, or similar topographies of
So we have
behavior.
circumscribed interest.
Oh, I thought you knew them all off the top of your head.
I did, but then I got myself distracted and I forgot. Prescribed interests, ritualistic interests, repetitive interests, specialized interest, unique interests, perseverative interests. I don't think maybe I covered them all in all of the articles.
Yes.
Did I get them all?
I think so. Thematic ritualistic.
Yeah, thematic rituals is mine.
behaviors.
Okay.
Yeah.
which is
Sure.
apparently different than ritualistic.
Right.
behaviors.
So all of these would fall under the old third column of the diagnosis, which is restricted and repetitive behavior, and the new second column of the diagnosis. But I think more specifically here, if we're thinking about it from the diagnostic perspective, we're not talking about just stereotypic behavior that might take motor or vocal forms, but more a really intense topic of interest that an individual has a lot to say about most of the time.
A more complex class of behavior in terms of, most of the participants in these articles were either had topics that they wanted to discuss. They had play sort of themes that they would use. So they'd often be using various toys in the environment. They may or may not be interacting with other people to engage with those toys in a certain way. So more complex than to say, I think stereotypy would capture. So I think unique interest was the terminology that we've sort of been using in all of our notes, because I think that more than most of the article discussions, I think captures the breadth of typographies of behavior that we're discussing. Though, I mean, again, I think there's room for other terminology. Certainly, I think none of us would want to use perseverative interests. While I think that might capture the component of being a very specific interest that keeps coming up, even if the stimuli change or even if the audience is clearly not interested. I think when we talk about perseveration, it's very clear that it's a word that has
negative.
It's a negative connotation to
it. Is.
Tameika.
Because a lot of these words and terms you guys are saying, like I still hear all the time, like, obsessions and fixations and he's stuck on this, she's stuck on this. Like it's very negative language when people describe these things to me and are saying, can we work on removing this thing? So I think intentionally calling it just unique interest kind of removes that stigma, like right off the top. Like I'm not going to judge this thing you really, really like to talk about. I don't need to do that in order to help with the issue. And I think that just kind of the way across the articles it was described so differently, I feel like it's like a snapshot of field because I hear it described like 1,000 different ways, but I know what they're talking about when they say it. I know what they mean.
And I think because we all started off this episode saying what some of our unique interests are, right? And I think that it's important to note that everyone has something that they're uniquely interested in, right?
And that no one else cares about.
No, I was going to say, and some of those are more...
or very few people.
Right. They're either more mainstream or less mainstream, right? So like you were saying, Rob, it used to be that liking Marvel and comic books made you a big old nerd. You're still a big old nerd, but now a lot of other people share your interests. So it's not looked at as being outside of the mainstream anymore. Right now, it's very socially acceptable to be into Marvel. And,
well, not the way I talk about Marvel. It's still very nerdy.
I know it is, but you see where I'm going with this, right?
You make it weird.
But you haven't changed.
I haven't even seen it. So
that's okay, Jackie.
You haven't seen it, Jackie, the one Marvel?
Marvel?
I haven't seen that Marvel everyone keeps talking about.
I'm sorry.
No, but my point is, Rob, you didn't change, right? But the society around you changed such that what was used to be a really unique interest is now a very mainstream interest. So depending on where you were in time, someone might look at you and say, wow, this kid is really perseverating on these Marvel characters. Maybe we should do something about that. Everyone else is going to think he's weird. And now, lo and behold, you're the coolest cat on the block because you know all of the Marvel characters, right?
Every single one.
Every single one. But it was the perspective of society that changed from then to now.
Somewhat. We're getting there. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So just because someone's unique interest falls outside of the mainstream doesn't automatically mean it needs to be something that is changed. Right, is where I'm trying to get. Took me a little while to get there.
I also like the term unique interests, if we sort of use that as our umbrella term. It can be used as sort of a neutral description. I think it leans more towards it's a positive because everyone should have things they're interested in. But it also doesn't preclude someone from saying, my son has some unique interests or my daughter has unique interests. I love that they have those interests. I'm a little worried that they're missing out on other things. So you're coming at it from more of a problem-solving aspect of it's great that they have these interests. However, all of us have unique interests that if we spend too much time with them can become harmful. So it's not a matter of, well, if we call them unique interests, then we can't, cut down how many hours the kids spend on those unique. No, that's not what we're talking about, because there's too much of a good thing. We can't all eat too many donuts, even though it's our right to eat as many as we want to. So you still can use unique interests and balance that with a need for, well, wouldn't it be great if we, showed this student that there were other things that they could spend their time with, whether they then chose to or not, that's their right. Or there are times that they're available and times that they can't be, because that's true about every child, not just children with disabilities. Everyone's got to stop doing their favorite things and go to school, which, that just sort of makes school sound like the worst place ever, or go to work or go do, the chores around the house. Everyone's got to,
Or maybe you're hanging out with someone else who also has a very unique interest.
Oh,
there is some give and take there, right? About whose turn it's going to be to talk about their favorite thing.
Because, no one wants to, we've all been in situations where someone just won't stop talking about a particular thing. And it's not pleasant being on the other side of that. So I feel like the main issue that usually is being hinted at when this is brought up to me is it's too much. It's the muchness. It's happening too much, too often. I don't want to hear it all day. I don't want to buy every single Toy Story object we see in public. It's too much. So it's kind of, I don't mind that he makes it, but we really need to take it down. Is kind of where the meat of the issue seems to live, is the muchness of it.
Yeah.
Rather than the narrowness or oddness or, uniqueness of it. It's much more the muchness of it.
So, for example, Tameika, you might want to talk about some recent twists on WandaVision, but you may not want to hear about...
But your audience did not... They're not here for that.
They might not want to hear that.
And you want to hear that, actually.
And you might not want to get into the details of, did you know that was based on a 12-issue Maxi series? Maybe that's more than you want to hear about Vision.
No one wants that. Yeah.
So, all right. So I think we've agreed upon unique interests. I think we talked about the pros and cons there, and we'll kind of come back to it a little bit in the articles we'll be discussing. But before we do that and get into some of that research, let's take a quick break. And then when we come back, let's delve into some ways that unique interests can be incorporated in treatment planning. We'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu. See you there!
And we are back talking with Tameika Meadows about incorporating unique interests in our practice and in our treatment planning. Before the break, we talked all about how we're going to use the term unique interests going forward. And now we're going to talk about some specific research related to this topic. But one more thing before we do that, and that's reminding everyone listening that ABA Inside Track is ACE approved. By listening to the show, you're able to earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is listen to the show and head over to our website, abainsidetrack.com/getceus. That's GET-CEUS. You're going to need to enter in 2 secret code words that we're going to talk about through the episode. We're going to do the first one right now. This is a special code word from our special guest, and it is Pietro. Pietro. T-R-O. Pietro, which, do you want to explain to everyone what Pietro's significance is?
Yes. So if I could just get like a quick 3 hours to just like briefly describe. Okay, no. Okay. So Pietro is Wanda's twin brother. And he's amazing and he has powers. And I'm going to stop now. But that's who that is.
Very good.
Yep.
Very good.
First appearance, X-Men number 4, 1964, I think. Maybe 1965.
So is WandaVision one of the Marvels?
Yes.
Yes. And
Okay,
it's
I'm so
awesome.
sorry. I don't know.
It's okay. It's all right.
Jackie doesn't know.
I know nothing.
Jackie came out of her cave to listen to the birds
Okay.
and heard a passing. One of the two birds were talking about the Marvel movies. And she's like, what is this Marvel these birds speak of? Pietro. And Jackie, speaking of bird calls, let's talk about Baker's 2000 article about using unique interests in teaching game playing behavior.
I like the premise of this article. This one is 2020. I just had to do it. Oh, no, it's not. It's
It's not
2000.
it's 2000.
Every time I read it, I thought it said 2020 and I laughed, but it's not. It says 2000. I just wanted it to say 2020.
We briefly discussed this in our turn-taking episode, talking specifically about teaching game playing behavior. This was referenced as kind of one of the early articles on the subject
I
of
think
playing
I
board
referenced
games.
it.
Yeah, just to kind of give a little intro on why they thought about this was that they were like, okay, they're calling it thematic idiosyncratic activities, but they could just be unique interests, right? And here they say, okay, our young children that get diagnosed may have these unique interests that preclude them from other social interaction with their peers, and potentially they may see less social interaction with their siblings, right? And so the authors point out that the sibling relationship is most often our first relationship from birth, but it gets more and more difficult if the child diagnosed with autism seems unmotivated to play with the other sibling. But children may be motivated to engage in their own ritualistic play that could be child preferred and it could occur frequently. So could we put these two together and use preferences as part of a game in order to then increase sibling interaction? So very clever. And so they used 3 participants with low to moderate CAR scores, all of them engaged in fairly high ritualistic behavior or unique interest. They had very significant unique interest. Ken, who was 5, liked to repetitively make number lines on paper. And his sibling was a sister who was 7. I think that's important to note that they're fairly close in age, so playing together would be appropriate. I really like that. Although 5 and 7 seems like it might be a little of a stretch because it might be hard, right? 7-year-olds sometimes can play like a 3 to 5-year-old, right? But they don't want to a lot of the times.
My kids are almost 4 years apart and they all play together.
Okay, that's good to know. I don't have a basis because I only have one. But I was just thinking about it because their rationale was, these are all like close enough in age. And so that's good. Wayne was the second participant. He was 5. His sister was 8. And he liked crashing cars and talking about crashing cars. And his sister did not want to play with him because he frequently would engage in aggression toward her. And she said that he was mean and never listened. And then finally, Annie was 6 years old and her sister was 8 years old. And Annie engaged in some repetitive speech of specific movie scripts, which I know that a lot of us do, right? A lot of the time.
Yes. Yes.
And so here, her sister said that Annie wouldn't let her play. She only wanted to watch specific video clips over and over again. And this was during the time of the VCR, where you would rewind the VCR.
The Matrix had only just entered the consciousness as our first DVD here in America when this article was published.
Right.
So it really paints a picture.
It does. And they're like, and they took the VCR like Beauty and the Beast, Cinderella. And I was like, I know. I had those with like the big, huge video case.
Clamshell
cases.
Clamshell.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
They were huge.
They were so big, but I loved them so much.
You still
I
have
probably
some
still
of
have
those?
them. Yeah, I
you
probably
should
do.
sell those on eBay. Those things are collector's items now.
I still do. I think I have the Rescuers still.
The original
anyway.
or Down Under?
No, just the regular one.
Okay.
But anyway, the sessions occurred in a playroom at a university. They didn't occur at home. Generalization data were taken at home and at school later on at a different time. So the therapists included undergraduate and graduate students. And what I found particularly interesting is that the data recorders were naive to the experiment to make sure that they were preventing bias, which I love.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's nice. They put there on. So sessions could last as long as 40 minutes, but they didn't have to. So whenever one of the children said that they didn't want to play anymore, sessions were over. And they looked at the percentage of intervals engaged in social play, but not ritualistically engaging in that perseverative behavior during a 10-minute probe anywhere throughout that up to 40-minute play session. They looked at attention behavior. They looked at child affect. They looked at the percentage of intervals where the child engaged in that thematic interest. And then finally, a parent survey was completed. And so what they did here, which was pretty clever, is that they found a game that required 2 or more players and was age appropriate for both siblings. And they made a special game out of it. So they based it like on a bingo game where you're matching, and they incorporated the thematic interest into the bingo game.
Yeah, they were a bunch of bingo variants, really.
Yep, bingo variants. Yeah. So for instance, like with
your bingo
Ken,
expansion pack.
Yeah. With Ken, the bingo board had numbers and he could put triangles around the multiples of 5. Wayne's my favorite. That one looked like the most fun, where they would shoot cars onto a board, and when the car fell down, that was the number that they had to look for on their bingo card. That one looked fun.
Yeah.
That is
I would
fun.
play that. That sounds
Right, I
really
would play
fun.
that too. They had like
Wow.
a track. And then the final for Annie, they had movie box pictures on it. And you would pick a card and then you could fast forward or rewind. That was with the symbols. And you could watch the video clips. And
Cool.
whatever video clip it was on was the bingo number.
See, I thought
That's
that
really
was
cool.
that was clever. You get like a little
Yeah.
best of package, and you get your card with like, it's like 10 seconds or 30 seconds rewind or whatever, and then whatever show it is, Little Mermaid or whatever. That's what's on the bingo card. I thought that was very clever. I mean, I feel like they spent most of the time on this article being like, how are we supposed to use crashing cars in bingo? This is a tricky
Right?
one.
But yeah. And so the design was a multiple baseline across participants design. It would have been cool if they could do it across activities, but I understand that must be very challenging. I always like to see the across activities to see if you see any generalization like within, different activities, but that's besides the point. It took between 6 and 10 months to complete the study because of the staggered baseline. And they had baseline intervention, maintenance, and follow-up. So during baseline, they just pulled out all the toys. Many were bingo-like. I said that they said that. And they said to play, right? And the adult tried to initiate games and all of the things that were unique preferences to that individual were also there. So they just took data on all of those dependent variables. And then during the intervention, I'm not going to lie, I would have liked to see a little bit more procedures here because I'm not sure I could do this myself.
I think a lot of that, I think this is a pretty common concern about most of the articles that we're discussing today, is it just felt like the fact that they did something sort of novel and they did something creative and then results, it's like, oh, it's great. How did you, they were the kind of an
Bada bing,
assumption
bada
of like,
boom.
kids love games. They'll figure it out. Don't worry about it. Anyway, just get that track set up and you're all good, which I agree, Jackie, was a little like, well, how would I run this? I'm sure it wouldn't work as well as in the article with these 3 exact, participants.
Yeah, they said there was 11 to 14 sessions across 2 months. So they did spend some considerable time teaching the children how to play the game that incorporated their unique interest. They had to teach the rules of the game. They had to actually teach why someone wins. Basically, why would someone win, and reinforce that, because it was clear to them that not all of the kids in the study had that skill already. And then that support was systematically faded, but they didn't tell us how or when. But if there was an initiation, they provided prompting. And that's what I got from it. And so following the intervention, they ran 10 to 14 sessions across 1 to 2 months of maintenance, which seems like a lot.
Yeah, it does.
Right? Woo! they're making sure it's hanging out.
It's sticking.
Yeah. And the maintenance part was just the same as baseline, except those newly taught games were present. And then they did a follow-up. They're like, we're not done yet. After those 14 sessions, we're going to assess at 1 and 3 months again. So, whoo!
That's some thoroughness right there.
Yeah, they were not cutting any corners. This does not seem like it was the master's thesis. We're going to keep going. So, not surprising, all 3 participants engaged in low social play with siblings during baseline. So Ken, it did engage in some non-ritualistic play as treatment went on, so 8 out of the 10 maintenance conditions and 4 follow-ups. Wayne played other games during the majority of the play session in maintenance for 8 out of the 10 sessions and all 4 follow-ups. And Annie engaged in other games in 4 out of the 14. So we saw increases across the board, which is pretty nice. We also saw increases in positive social interactions during the generalization probes at home and at school. Considerably, usually, 2 of the participants up to 95% of peer social interactions, and 1 went up to 61%. So that's pretty big, a big jump. They found more increases in joint attention behaviors and affect from neutral to happy and interested. And then what I like out of all of this is that when they interviewed the siblings had more positive statements to say about their brother or sister in this case. So some of them were, he can play some board games, it's better. And 2 of the 3 changed responses from no, does your sibling play with you often, to positive replies. So that's kind of nice, right?
That is nice.
Yeah. One of them was still throwing shade, kind of dissing their brother's inability to play operations.
I know.
Still, so come on, let's cut your brother some slack.
Maybe that was her unique interest, though. Maybe she really wanted someone to play Operation with her.
Maybe. Yeah.
It's a two-way street. And speaking of two-way streets,
So low social validity on this study because Operation was not included. Just bingo.
Maybe. For me, this research highlights the two-way street thing, right? Why are we always saying that the autistic child is the one that needs to change their behavior to fit in with everybody else when we could be taking it from the other side and saying, what can we do to arrange this environment such that the autistic child is more compelled to participate or feel involved here, right? And they did that, and they saw more interaction between the siblings, and not only in the context of that one game, but in some cases, branching out a little bit to other games. So to me, that was a good example of how one might make those types of modifications.
I like that they were thinking about that, right? They were thinking about how we can incorporate things that, the children like. And maybe, to be honest, we don't know, later on, maybe now the sibling will also start liking it, right? Who knows? Because of the increased interactions, potentially. I mean, that card game sounds amazing.
It really does. All of the bingo games, the modified bingo games sound way more fun than regular bingo.
Oh, yeah.
Regular bingo is boring.
Regular bingo is boring.
It's like Chutes and Ladders. So boring.
Oh, I hate that game.
Oh, no, yeah. Chutes and Ladders is the worst.
It's the worst game.
It never ends, and it's boring. It's a never-ending boring game. This Candyland ends eventually. Chutes and Ladders could go on forever.
That's all I'm going to say about my study.
Great. Thanks, Jackie. Dana.
Yeah, so I'm going to review the Vismara and Leon's study from 2007.
Your enemies.
No, I'm really not. I've liked this study for a long, long time because many of you know that I've been interested and researched joint attention for a long, long time. And hear all about joint attention, you can go back to episode 74 when I talk about it at length. But here we will just suffice to say that joint attention is generally thought of as the shared experience between 2 people and some other object and event in the environment. So that shared experience could look like talking about the event, looking at one another to think about the event together, pointing or gesturing towards the event as it occurs. You don't need all the pieces of that response to have it count as joint attention, but often you do see them occur together. And the reason why joint attention is thought to be important is it's an early emerging developmental skill that we see for children as early as 9 months and can often be an important marker to indicate a change in the developmental trajectory for a child. And the presence of joint attention is thought to be important component in the development of not just social behavior, but language development as well. So, well, I think we want to honor differences in individuals and say maybe joint attention doesn't function in the same way for different folks. It does kind of remain this like crucial early skill that does seem to be important in a variety of ways. So we can think of it as a cusp behavior. And thus far, it seems to be an important part of development. So that's why we kind of keep coming back to focusing on it. What they wanted to do in this study was look to see if we don't see joint attention occurring at high rates for an autistic child, are there things that we can do to make that joint attention be more present? And one of the things that they decided to do in this study was say, well, these individuals have, I think in this study they call them circumscribed interests. Am I right on that one there, Rob?
No, this is perseverative interests.
In this study, they're called perseverative interests. So they say, well, we have these perseverative interests. So what if we arrange some joint attention interactions around the perceptive interests that are present? Would that increase joint attention? And if so, would we then see generalization away from the perceptive interest to other interests as well once we've started to see this joint attention response? So that was really what they were interested in looking at here. And they had 3 children, all diagnosed with autism, and they're really young. So they were 26 to 38 months at the start of the study. And the study was done with them and their primary caregivers. And what they wanted to do here was they set up these opportunities for joint attention to occur in the context of the perceptive interest, which I think they call PI condition, and non-perceptive interest, which they call the NP condition. And they did a reversal design between the two. And then they followed that up with an alternating treatments design as well, just sort of add on there to the end. And what I liked about this is that they identified certain toys that the children were very, very interested in. And for these children, they all were very, very interested in like letter and number type toys. So those were their unique interests. And then what they attempted to do was match other stimuli that looked or topographically were quite similar, but did not contain that exact unique interest, and use that as the NP condition. So for example, they had an ABC 1, 2, 3 book for the unique interest, and then they paired that in the other condition with a storybook. And then they did the same with an ABC puzzle and a transportation puzzle. The game Caribou. I know, Rob, you're familiar with the game Caribou.
I am.
I love that game.
It is a fantastic game, and it's out of print and you can't get it anymore, but it's really great for teaching early letter ID. And there's like little balls and a key and a treasure chest. It's very fun.
Kind of reminds me of the old show King of the Hill. One of the characters makes a game called Spin Your Choice, because people like to spin and people like to make choices. And I feel like Caribou is that.
Yeah, that's
Peggy. You know
Peggy.
Tameika. Yeah, Peggy. Because, again, with Caribou, it's like people love treasure chests and putting balls into holes and opening doors with a key. It's like, that's what that game is.
It's a great game. But it contains letters. So that one was paired with Don't Break the Ice, which is another great game, but isn't the same as Caribou.
What? Sorry, another great game. You put sarcasm quotes around the great part of Don't Break the Ice there?
I don't know. I feel like Don't Break the Ice takes you like 3 solid
37
minutes.
years. It takes
To
37 years to put it together,
10
and they're done
seconds.
in 5 seconds.
Yes.
And they're like, what are we going to do now?
Crash.
It's like you're gonna watch me
hit with
set
the
this up
mallet.
again. That's what you're going to do.
Right. So wait. So Rob, you're saying that it is a great game? I can't tell what's going on here.
It's not a great game. It's
not a great game.
awful.
Okay.
Awful game.
I like it.
Jackie's a fan.
But is it a Marvel game, Jackie? Is the question.
Okay, so those two are paired together. Clearly, we're not getting Iowa here on the pairing of those.
That's
two
I
games.
put that in the limitation section. Like, nobody's going to choose Don't Break the Ice. Ever.
All right. And then there was a magnet letterboard. They paired that with Connect 4. I don't know enough about the letterboard to know if that was a good pairing. And then they had Uno and bowling. Just go with it, Rob. It's okay. It's okay. So the point is that some of them had letters and numbers in them, and some of them didn't. They started off really strong on the pairings, and then they got a little looser as they went on.
I must have
in
skimmed
table
this.
1.
I don't remember these paired games being. So I remember reading like paired games. That's a great idea. Yeah, good. It's got to have the unique interest component, but be similar. And I don't think I read enough detail because I would have stopped reading this. I would be like, no, this is garbage. This is clearly not paired well.
It's not garbage. It's fine.
Not paired well.
It's okay, right? It's okay
maybe
because either they contain the unique interest or they don't. Right? That's the important part.
Yes.
Here. Okay. And so then the sessions that they conducted were conducted in pivotal response teaching style.
It is not well defined. That's about as much description as you get in this article.
I've read a lot of PRT articles and it's hardly ever well defined in the articles. But if you read enough of them, you get the gist of it. So I'm going to give you a quick summary of what the components of pivotal response teaching or training generally are. And they would be to follow the child's lead, include their interest in the choice of materials that are available, intersperse both acquisition tasks and maintenance tasks throughout the session, vary what the tasks are to maintain interest, reinforce correct responses and attempts. That is an important point. Provide rewards immediately and contingent on the target, but the rewards that are provided are naturalistically occurring reinforcers in the environment. So all of those reinforcers that are there are embedded within the teaching session and they are directly related to the response that's occurring. It's all conducted in like a naturalistic play setting. Okay, so you're on the floor, there's lots of toys around.
I feel like the best description of PRT I ever saw was the time Lynn Cagle was on the TV show Super Nanny.
I saw that.
Yeah. You see that, Tameika? Where she's like showing the little boy how to, ask for more, like swinging. Like I was like, oh, I get it. Okay. Because I read a lot of articles referring to PRT and I'm like, what? This sounds like 5 other things I've seen before. That was the best example.
Yeah. So there's a lot of components there that I just think of as good EIBI, good ABA, right? And there are a few other things that I didn't list here that are a little bit more specific to PRT, but those are generally how the sessions run and look. So these sessions were 2.5 hour sessions that they ran in the study. And the first hour, they had the primary experimenter with the parent working together, and then they faded out and the parent completed the session. And then after that, after the 2.5 hour session, then they did a probe. And that was when they took the data for the study. And so then, like I said, it was a reversal design and it varied which condition came first, depending on the participant. But they either did the unique interest condition first for several sessions and then the non-unique interest condition next, or vice versa. And they did, I think, 3 of each for each participant. And then from there, they did an alternating treatments condition where each session it varied, whether they had the unique stimuli present or the other stimuli present. And yes, it did take a lot of time because these were quite long sessions that they did.
It's a good thing they were PRT sessions. If they were anything else, I don't think they could have sustained the child's interest for as long as they needed.
Well, that's the whole idea, right? You're following the child's lead. So really what they were interested in here was the number of joint attention initiations on the part of the child. And those the way that they define them were either verbal or nonverbal behaviors to direct the caregiver's attention to the object, event, or environment. And that might have included gaze shifts, pointing, showing, giving, or commenting. So like all those basic components they brought up. And then they also had non-familiar observers, so someone else come in and give an overall rating of the child's interest and happiness from a later videotape probe, which is kind of a nice like secondary measure as well. Yeah, so in baseline, no one had any joint attention initiations. And the unique interest condition, they started to see more of those occur and then less when they went back to the ununique. I'm sorry, I'm not doing a good job translating my terms.
We don't want to use that. We don't like the terminology of this.
I'm trying to keep the terms all the same. Back to the non-unique, they saw a drop back into baseline levels. But then when they went to the alternating treatments condition and started going back and forth between the two types of conditions, they began to see more joint attention responses occur in the non-unique sessions as well, for the most part, which is pretty exciting. And it did take a long time for them to get to this point. So there's always the possibility that, just the time that was spent with those additional materials made them a little less novel. Maybe they became more interesting over time, right? But one could also make the argument that there was a lot of rapport building in the context of those unique interests with both the experimenter and the caregiver that led them to start to see more of these joint attention type responses occurring.
That's true. I mean, I think the use of the reversal really makes me more comfortable in the author's final point of that it was the use of the unique interests that increased the amount of joint attention bids and joint attention behaviors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Related to the affect too, they definitely saw a higher positive affect with the unique interest, but they did start to see more of that carryover as well with the others. And that's an important point with respect to joint attention, because research has demonstrated that you can teach the response, right? You can teach the response topographically, but does that mean that you're actually teaching the function of joint attention? Because the idea of joint attention is that I see something cool and I want to check in to see if you see the same cool thing that I do, right? So it's inherently a social event. So the fact that they not only saw it in the unique interest, but in the non-unique interest, and that didn't just look like a rote response, but it had some of that positive affect to it, is a really important secondary measure and notification there that perhaps it wasn't just a taught response, but it really was trying to share something that was cool and interesting and neat, right? Yeah. And you can 100% see the difference in a kid between just I've been told I'm supposed to make this response now, right? Versus, whoa, look at this cool thing, right? But it's hard to have that translate into the research that that really is what happened. But I will have to trust them that really is what they saw happen here. And it was pretty cool that they were able to get that type of response.
Thanks, Diana.
Yeah.
So
no problem.
I'm going to briefly touch upon the Boyd et al. 2000 article, because again, I think it's going to repeat the theme that's been in our other articles so far, which is if one were to use unique interests in treatment planning, you will likely see more positive results. And certainly these aren't the only studies that are using these techniques, and there's more research to be done. But, here's another one that sort of adds to the base of literature. And in this article, they're referring to what we're calling unique interests as circumscribed interests, which sounds very technical and very boring. So we'll just kind of keep going back to our unique interests terminology, which is certainly better than the restricted repetitive behaviors that they sort of start the article in describing how, autistic children have restricted repetitive behaviors. A lot of acronyms in this article, which I never appreciate because it is hard to keep track, especially when you're making up new acronyms. I know restrictive repetitive behavior isn't one, but circumscribed interests, like you chose to make that. Like that's not the title in any of these other articles. And this is 2007. So there have been other articles on the same topic. In any case, the authors here really looking at some of the other research, they reference the Baker article, they reference an article by Charlotte Christie, looking at how these unique interests actually can often show, the children can show more preference for those interests than they do for something like food, which we always think of food as being the best reinforcer of all time. But apparently it's not always the case in comparison to the use of unique interests. Then kind of asking the questions, okay, great. So we know that unique interests may lead to better outcomes in some of these other studies, but A, how do you determine what the unique interest is meaningfully rather than just counting on, parent report? Is there a way that we can systematically determine what is a relevant unique interest for the student that might be important to incorporate into treatment planning? And then also, do we see a change in interaction with peers or just in general peer-related social behavior when unique interests are utilized versus, say, lower preference is the term they use. So lower preference items in terms of social bids or social play. So we have a number of 5-year-olds that engage in low rates of initiations to peers, low rates of social interactions in their school. And again, the children all sort of ranged from either not scoring as autistic or having mild or moderate autism on the CARS scale. And I think this is true about a lot of the research we're discussing today. It's either students who'd be classified now as like high functioning autism or having mild autism on some of the rating scales. And these were sort of pull-out sessions, for 2 of the 3 participants that were used here. They'd get these descriptive assessments. They'd talk to their teacher. They'd talk to their mothers and say, what does your child like as a they called it circumscribed interest, but, we're calling unique interest through the use of interviews. What is it that they spend a lot of their time engaging in? What's something they spend a lot of time and a high intensity when they're focusing on to sort of determine some possible targets of these unique interests. And then they sort of looked at, okay, well, when we've got all these alternate tangible stimuli available and the circumscribed interest available, how long does the child, spend on these various interests? And so we have Jason and Alan and Jin, our three participants. Jason loved Thomas trains, and he spent a ton of time during this sort of probe playing with the Thomas trains. Alan, also Thomas trains. And then Jin liked a construction truck. So, given all of these different items, what do they spend the most time on? And then what they looked at was, all right, well, what if we included these unique interests in opportunities for social interactions? So they had two conditions. They had a choice condition and an alternating treatment condition. I'll talk about the choice condition first. So in the choice condition, you've got your sort of, typical experimental room with tape going down the middle, like it's a bad sitcom. No one can agree on what side they're going to be on. And you've got two peers, each of them holding an item. One peer is holding the item of unique interest, so the Thomas trains or the construction truck. And the other peer is holding some other item that the child didn't choose in any of the other kind of descriptive analyses. The peer was told, respond to any bid from the participant. So respond if the participant comes over and starts trying to play with you. And every 30 seconds, they'd bring the participant back to the center line and let them choose where they wanted to go. So they were making discrete choices about where they wanted to spend their time. And the researchers were looking at, okay, where do they spend their most time? What percentage of time do they spend in each of these quadrants? But also, what's the latency to going to the different areas? And then the other condition they did was the alternating treatment condition. And in this one, there was no tape. There was only one peer, and that peer either had the item of the unique interesting item or a low preference item. And then there was a duplicate of whatever item they were holding 2 to 3 feet away from that peer. And the child was just said, here you go play. Here they were really looking at, okay, where does the child spend most of their time? And what's the latency for them spending the time with the peer versus just playing with the unique item alone? So again, in one, they had a choice of kind of play with peer with the item that they clearly prefer versus some other item. The other, they could have played with their unique interest item at any point. They didn't have to play with the peer at all. So what percentage of time did they choose the unique versus low preference? I don't want to say peer, but the peer with those items. And also, what percentage of time did they engage in social interactions, and how long did it take before they engaged during these little they were just 5-minute sessions. So in the choice sessions, we have Jason, who likes his Thomas trains. He spent about half of his time with the unique interest item. Alan spent 100% of the time with the unique interest item. And Jin spent almost 100% of his time with the unique interest item. So again, it was with a peer with that item. When it was an alternating treatments condition, however, they had much higher percentage of interactions with the peer if that unique item was included. So it was, 48% for Jason. It was 48% for Alan. It was about 28% for Jin. So while they didn't spend potentially more time with the peer, they were much more likely to spend time with the peer if the peer had that unique item than some other item. They also showed a lot lower latency to that social engagement. Similar to the article you discussed, Diana, they had a blind observer doing kind of, hey, how much do you think the kid is enjoying these interactions? Did they seem more fun with the peer when they have the unique item? And yes, all of the blind observers said, yeah, they look pretty good. They look like they're having a lot more fun in this session versus that session. And of course, the observer didn't know whether it was the unique interest session or the low preference item session. So again, that same idea of, hey, the kids seem to be having more fun when they're using items that they seem to like. So
when you put it that way, it sounds like
it sounds like such an easy,
very basic
we need research
idea
on this. Kids like the things they like. They don't like the things they don't like.
And yet,
this
is an important topic.
It is a very important topic. So again, I think this one of all the 4 articles is sort of the most like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Of course. Why wouldn't that be the response you'd expect to get? So, the authors felt like for at least 2 of the 3 participants, there was that clear delineation between I'm choosing my preferred unique item versus a low preference item. So the authors posit, hey, this might be an interesting method to determine the highly preferred unique interesting items for that participant. So not just counting on the interview and only going there, not just using a more kind of stock free operant kind of reinforcer assessment, but actually using an assessment, there's a meaningful interaction engaged. In this case, a social interaction, which is sort of what we're looking for. We want to be able to increase social interactions for everyone when they're interested. And if we can see a change in that social interaction, oh, great. Well, this is a good toy that you might want to have in, say, your preschool for these, these were younger children. Again, some of the same limitations, I think, were in some of the other articles. We're talking about a small sample size. These were all high-functioning autistic children. So have clear preferences or are able to make more choices in their day. And, they were in a little room. They weren't in the classroom for most of the participants. So it's hard to say whether or not this is going to be a generalizable result. But still adding more strength to our overall kind of thesis of today's episode, right? We have one more article, and this is not really a research article in the way you think of a research article. It's more like a fun story that somebody wrote out. But I think in terms of all three of these, I don't know if the rest of you agree, but I feel like this was the most useful article if I were going to try to convince someone to use a child's unique interests at school, at like a school setting. This article probably reads the easiest and would be the most convincing, even though we would all consider it to have like the least amount of experimental control of any of these. Does it have any experimental control might actually be part of that, because it's really more of a social validity survey than anything else.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I really like it. And reading it, I found myself thinking of how I could like start doing it with like current clients. Like I was this is really cool. Like how would I do that? Like, yeah, it definitely like got wheels turning for me.
So Tameika, would you mind taking the lead on discussing this one, and then we'll kind of jump in as we go?
So basically, like you were saying, they were in a kind of primary school setting, and they were looking at 3 kids in the classroom, and they wanted to kind of figure out how they could get them more motivated to participate in activities going on in the classroom, kind of helping that relationship between the teaching staff and the children, and then helping the staff kind of, I want to say, change perceptions a little bit of the things that these students were doing, which again, I feel like is super, super relevant, because that's something I deal with all the time, is kind of explaining to people, okay, let's look at this a different way, instead of treating this like that thing he does that distracts from what we really have to do. Like let's kind of reframe that to, you found something that's super motivating. Okay, that's great, because that can be really hard to do. So now that we found it, like, what do we do about that? Because just kind of, saying, oh, it's not time for that, you don't want to do that. You're fighting against a natural motivator. That's not going to go well. So let's figure out a different way to handle that. So they did kind of have some different conversations around, well, what do we call this? Is, which we talked about earlier, is it a repetitive behavior? Is it a rigid fixation? Is it, what do we call this thing that you're fascinated with or obsessed with or stuck on or fixated on? And which really kind of reflects the way that it's going to be viewed, the way that it's going to be accepted, the way that the other children present are going to accept it and deal with it. And a lot of autistics would say that these kind of, unique interests are fundamental to their well-being. They are not a hobby. They are not a quirk. It is a part of kind of what makes them them. So they would see it as being something that kind of is almost part of their identity in a way, and like a unique skill set versus, this thing I do that other people don't like when I do it.
Mm.
Yeah.
The section that I really liked is when they had like these multiple pages where they actually showed you like a little like visual of the special interest map, which I thought was so cool. So it's like this diagram where they put all this information about the kid, and like, this is what they like, and this is what motivates them. Like, they like to run, or they like to spin, or they like flashing lights, or they like to talk about, 1970s records or something. Then they would like connect it to like curriculum. So because you like blank, here's how we can connect that to this thing we need to do in the instructional day to make it more interesting for you and to make it more enjoyable for you, and to kind of give you an opportunity in your day to be able to talk about this thing or to do this thing, depending on exactly what that special interest was. And it's pretty detailed. And I feel like a clinician could look at that, like we were saying with some of the earlier ones, they kind of left you like, well, how would I do that? But I feel like you could look at this one and say, okay, that's not so tough. I could do that. Like I could pick a client and I could do some interview and talk to their parents and do some observation, and I could make a little diagram and I could show it to the staff. So that was probably my favorite part. Another really good point they made is that the special interest kind of being embedded into school day or the curriculum helps with alternating between calming and activating activities, because as we discussed earlier, a big component of these kind of interests is the muchness. So the individual has a hard time kind of turning it off. So if it's something that's activating, it's going to be hard to kind of redirect or say, hey, let's go do this now. We've been doing that for a while. How about we switch to this? That's going to be tough. So kind of planning it out and saying, okay, so we're going to do this activity that maybe is either neutral or even non-preferred. And then we're going to do this really super preferred thing that you're going to like a lot, but we're not going to do it all day. We're going to then switch to something else. I thought that was really cool too, to make just like these natural transitions in the day and communicating it to the kids. So it's not like this abrupt, I'm taking you away from that thing you love so much, or I'm shutting down the conversation about that topic you like to talk about so much. And the map is created through interviewing caregivers, parents, teachers, people who know this child very, very well. If you're able to, you can actually interview the child, talk to them about their interests. Why do you like that? What do you like about it? And then just, good old observation, hanging out with that kid, watching them as they do it, seeing what they like about it. If the, environment is loud or quiet, or if it's morning or afternoon, does that have an effect on how much they like to do this thing or talk about that thing? They got some really good feedback from the teachers after they put this special interest map strategy in place. It was very positive. And the teachers described feeling like they understood these kids better, which I personally think is huge, because feeling a better relationship with this child you're trying to teach has a very big part to do with teaching. And it helped with classroom time management. So kind of being able to know, when do I need to kind of focus in and apply the strategy versus when are we kind of going through like the regular flow of the day, which I also feel like is important for a teacher, because, as we know, like most of the interventions we give them have to be incorporated into their day. We kind of can't give them something to do that's going to take up all their time. So it had like this natural flow where here's the parts of the day where you're going to be really, really kind of focusing in on this. And then here's the parts of the day where, you're just kind of doing your thing. It also encouraged multidisciplinary communication, because, the more people who know this child and can kind of talk about their unique interests, the better. It enhanced student well-being. The kids seemed to like being at school more. They liked being in class. They liked to participate. They seemed to be enjoying interacting with the teacher when they were kind of working through the curriculum or the instruction that had their unique interest embedded in it. The teachers reported feeling more confident. There was a lot of feedback about the teachers saying that, I know how to reach him or her now. I know how to communicate with them. Their eyes light up when I start talking about that topic that they really love to talk about. It's just nice. That was nice to see. The teachers reported that it increased the student ability to access the curriculum. So they were better able to benefit from being in the classroom and, from being at school by the special interest map being embedded into not just what the teachers were teaching, but how the teachers were teaching. A big strength mentioned in the article is that common school assessments, or even the IEP, they do give information about students, but it tends to be deficit focused, as we know.
Or it's like that one line of like, they
Oh
love
my
writing
God.
or love drawing.
I hear that all the time. And I've been guilty of it myself. I've been guilty of that one line. And then you're like, all right, let's dig into deficits, for 47 pages.
Who cares about that? Let's get into all the stuff we got to work on.
He's super friendly. And then here's 48 pages of things he's not doing. this is like the opposite. Like this is
Yeah.
like, hey, this little guy loves to talk about, black and white movies. He's fascinated by black and white movies. And, if you start talking about that, or you show pictures of that, or if you can incorporate that into your lesson, you are going to have his attention. He is going to be motivated. He is going to want to engage. Like, he is going to be all about it. So I thought that was really cool too.
It definitely went beyond just their preferred, reinforcers as well. It went into, they have sensory preferences or sensitivities. Then even things that we help with teachers, like what's their attention span? I'm kind of looking at Elliot's special interests for his maths, because this was a British study. What kind of prompts might be useful, but also what types of activities will he engage in, longer time. What does he like to read? What does he like to play with? What shows does he like to watch? Which, again, it goes way beyond the sort of like 1-2 line.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Loves TV. It's like, okay, great. There's a lot of TV, like Bewitched reruns. What's this kid watch?
Right. And how do I incorporate that into what we have to do today? Because I feel like that's such like without the detail of these maps that they include, if you just said to a teacher, hey, he loves Hot Wheels, if you could work that in the day, that would be great. Like, that's super vague. Like, what does that mean? But like, this is so much detail that they include, to where you look at it and you're like, okay, why have I not been doing this? Like, this makes so much more sense. It's like a little snapshot of that kid.
I do think this is an exciting start. I did read this and say, I want to try this. I then again, put my sort of like, well, I'm going to be pessimistic for a minute kind of hat on. And okay, so one of the challenges, while all the teachers loved the map, none of them actually made the map. I believe they were all made by the specialist person who sort of was, pioneering the use of this specific map. Though the questionnaires are modified, there's nothing, they're in the article, there's nothing too, mind-blowing about these questionnaires. They're generally just good drilling down kind of questions. So again, what if the teachers had to make these maps first? Would they be able to get as meaningful a map as the ones here? I think that, teachers are pretty creative. So I'm sure they could have come up with some of the ideas. Like, I'm going to use, what was it? Like, I'm looking at Elliot's again. I'm going to use Legos. I'm going to use the high score of a Mario game to place value activity, or I'm going to practice using Luigi's racing car.
Should teach teachers how to make a map.
Well, I think there's our folloop right there.
Oh, did we just pull in? Did we just pull in?
I think we pulled in.
Let's pull into dissemination stage. Because I think in terms of, hey, I want other professionals to use these unique interests. Like you said, Tameika, just being like, hey, you should totally use kids' unique interests in treatment plans. Like, okay, yeah, thanks so much. I got a billion things to work on. My boss is breathing down my neck to like meet these IP goals. I'm sure I'll get that Lego video in there somehow. I'll make sure they get to watch it when they're done with my 10 activities I need them to do. This feels very much like, hey, here are some cool ideas. I don't know a teacher who wouldn't read this and say, wow, what a great, I could do this, or I could use this special interest to teach this or that. Is a really great, especially for the students who are already being, primarily educated in specialized programs,
right?
Where, I need you to teach about circumference. How do you teach about circumference? It doesn't matter, because they're being taught one-to-one or in a small group. So you could really be as creative as you want to be. And I think these maps give license to creative in a very productive way, rather than just trying to be fun. I'm just going to think of something fun I like and try to make this fun for everybody. I'm going to use the child's unique interests. I also want to see, did the child actually do better on the skill? Because while it is great that they had that one example of the student who had 100 SIBs down to 1 SIB a day, if they then didn't learn a single academic skill across that same period of time, it's great that the problem behavior went down, but they still have to learn academic skills at school. So is this effective in that regard? That's not a deal breaker in terms of using unique interests, but it is a question that
absolutely
someone's going to ask, who's in charge of money or in charge of whether you get to keep using unique interests. So you probably want to have an answer, right?
But several of these studies started with the unique interest and then were able to branch out from there, right?
Yeah.
But I would like to see more.
And that's a good
absolutely
point, Diana.
Yeah.
We did see that in almost every study. Start with the unique interests, and then, hey, magic, other interests kind of come into play.
But I don't think it's magic. I think it's building that trust with your client. Yeah.
Reminds me of some of the good behavior game studies we did, where they use good behavior game in the specialized classroom for kids with all the problem behavior kids. And kind of the lesson learned from that was it wasn't that these kids didn't know how to behave appropriately or didn't know how to engage in pro-social behavior. It was they didn't have an environment that really reinforced the behavior they had. So they just didn't engage in it.
Yeah.
The reinforcers weren't there. It's the same idea.
I've always said that being a behavior analyst is a really creative job. And that's my favorite part of the job, is getting to figure out how to make this work for this individual child. Right. So like this stuff's right up my alley because it just gives you like so many ideas about ways you can incorporate special interests.
It's one of those energizing topics too, where, I mean, everyone, you do the job long enough. I don't care how creative you were when you started, you fall into the rut where it's the same DTT programs, it's the same TAs, because it's hard to keep up like a high level of creativity all the time. And I think looking at this map was so much fun, even though there were a lot of, research-based questions. It was just very exciting to think of, oh, wow, these are great ideas. Wouldn't it be great to incorporate some of this? And you kind of get that little mojo back for planning. I'm going to do something exciting with these ideas.
And just really, I mean, I think that this is something you can look at and you can say, I could give this to, 3 different staff members and they might then translate it in 3 different ways. So, this person might take it and embed it into reading, and this person might take it and embed it into music. And then, so that's also cool too, because it's like, okay, how many different things can we do with, these 2 to 3 unique interests that you have? Like, it's just, I don't know. I feel like there's just all these different possibilities with a strategy like this.
Yeah. I don't know if you all caught the giant limitation in Elliot's special interest map. It did state that they wanted to use Luigi, who was one of his favorite characters, to do math. Nobody chooses to be Luigi as their favorite character.
I actually choose to be Luigi.
Of course you do, Jackie.
Luigi's my number 1. And then if the princess is available, she's my number 2.
I mean, the princess is awesome, though.
Right.
Yeah.
So
well, it depends on the game.
I took offense to this, Rob, when I saw this.
You took offense to my statement that no one wants to choose Luigi?
Yeah.
You know what? I think that's oldest sibling, firstborn child privilege jumping out when I actually bought my brother a shirt that says "Little brothers get Luigi."
Oh, wow.
Our children also have the same shirt as well.
That's some Luigi hate right there.
I don't appreciate it.
That's what that is. Uh-oh.
I don't hate Luigi, but when Nintendo called one year, I forget which year it was now, the year of Luigi, it was one of their worst financial years ever. I'm just saying. The game where he goes in a haunted house, I think, is a very good game. I appreciate Luigi. I'm kidding. I'm kidding, everyone. Luigi's a great character. Is it anyone's favorite?
Don't write angry letters. You're going to get angry letters.
It's going to be more anger than we get for any episode we've ever done. I used to like your podcast, but your anti-Luigi statements are really
I'm not anti-Luigi. They'll like me.
I like Luigi just fine. I'm never going to choose him first, though. All right. Well, I don't know. I think we're all
We've
feeling...
reached the end of the podcast.
We started talking about Luigi preferences. I think we're all very excited to use something like a map. And I think something like this map of special interests to, really catalyze new research on this topic, especially school-related research, which we definitely need more school-based research to begin with, would just be fascinating. So again, students, if you're out there and you're saying, what do I want? I want to do something with school and specialized interests of autistic children. Look at that. There you go. Start with this Davey article, structure it a little more. You've got yourself a beginning research article. Oh, all right. Well, I think we've done a nice kind of survey of some ways to use unique interests in our treatment planning and some fun ideas. I think that's a nice thing too, is when you have something that's got some research and is fun is always a definite benefit, right?
Yes.
Oh boy. I guess it's about time to go. But before we do, Tameika, thank you so much for coming on the show, for wanting to talk about unique interests, for saying, let's talk about that. And, starting us off and suggesting these articles. It was a lot of fun to talk about. If folks are interested in reaching out to you or want to read more of your work, where should they go?
I would tell them to go to iloveaba.com. That is where they can get in touch with me. They can read some things. They can find my books. Like, everything's kind of there in one place for them.
Once again, big thank you to Tameika Meadows from the iloveaba.com for coming on the show and talking with us about this very exciting topic. We all had a lot of fun, and we hope you did too. Again, if you want to follow Tameika or write to her about this or any of the topics she writes about, that's iloveaba.com. And if you enjoyed listening to one of our interviews or one of our topics, we'd really love it if you continue to do so, perhaps by subscribing to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you like to get your podcasts. There are a lot of other ways you can reach out to us as well. Certainly, you can go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, to find links to these episodes, as well as links to the articles discussed and a place to purchase CEs for the episodes. You can also find us on social media everywhere as ABA Inside Track. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter. You can find us on YouTube on our YouTube page, where these episodes also go live with the YouTube subtitling feature. And if you're interested in more ABA Inside Track, why not join us on our Patreon page, where for just $5 a month, you are able to join our social tracker group, where we have bi-monthly meetups with other BCBAs, chatting about, usually one given topic and then a lot of other kind of fun topics. If you're interested in maybe more content, you can also join us at our higher levels to get access to full-length book club podcasts worth 2 CEs each, as well as even a chance to join us on the show and discounts at the CE store. Just go to patreon.com/ABA Inside Track for more information and to sign up. Finally, if you're interested in purchasing CEs for this episode, you probably want to hear that second secret code word. And here it is, chickadee, CHICKADEE, chickadee. It's a bird, or like one of those old golden age, hey, my little chickadee characters. I threatened everyone that I'd do that accent the whole time, and they all left and made me do this recording all by myself. So, oh well. Chickadee. And with that, we come to the end of another episode of ABA Inside Track. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have ideas for episodes or any feedback, you can also write us at abainsidetrack@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. But until next time, and our full-length episode next week on another topic, keep responding. Bye.